Good evening. I'd like to call to order a special session of Athens City Council. It's Tuesday, October 11th, about 7 o'clock, shortly thereafter, 7:05. I'll establish a quorum with 5 members of council present, and I would like to make an announcement unscheduled, but all the same, I will do it. Citizen opinion surveys were mailed out on Monday, and the Ohio University Communications class would like to encourage all of those in our audience receiving a survey to please respond. Okay. For those of you that may be here on another matter, there are 5 members of council. I'm a member of council. I'm just acting as president pro tem in Bill's absence. Ordinances for second reading. An ordinance amending the 2005 appropriation ordinance and the 2005 interfund transfer ordinance.
Madam President, I move to amend 09705.
Second.
The reason for the amendment is to add some additional money to cover costs associated with labor negotiations, which we need to do in order to preserve the health and safety.
Okay. And I believe the clerk would have a copy of the amended
Yeah.
amount. And how much money are we talking about?
We're adding $5,000
Okay.
so that it will read $8,225 to general fund 101-104 in transaction class 200 to 300. So that's to cover additional costs related to labor negotiations.
Any other comments or questions on the amendment? Hearing none, all those in favor of the amendment say aye.
Aye.
Oh, 97.
Madam President?
Yes.
I move that we consider 09705 under suspension of the rules.
Second.
Can't do it.
Pardon?
We don't
You
have
need
enough
one
people.
We don't have enough people here. Okay.
There she is.
I move that we would consider 09705 under suspension of the rules.
Second.
What timing?
The reason for the suspension is that the negotiations are ongoing. We need to complete them in a timely manner so that we can maintain our contracts, so it's necessary for the safety of the citizens.
Okay, all those in favor of suspending the rules for the reasons mentioned say aye.
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 Those opposed? The rules are suspended. Move adoption?
Yes, Madam President, I move that we adopt 09705.
Second.
This is an appropriation ordinance and an interfund transfer ordinance. We talked this through last week. It appropriates $14,360 to Transportation Assistance Fund, $8,225 to the General Fund, and $4,325.02 to the FEMA Grant Fund. And then it transfers money from the FEMA Grant Fund to the Street Fund and the Sewer Fund to cover expenses related to fixing the effects of a flood earlier this year.
Any other comments on 09705? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ordinance passes, 09705 passes 6-0. 01005, an ordinance amending Athens City Code Title 11 Business Regulations, Chapter 1104, Vending, Peddling, and Soliciting. I'd like to turn this over to Councilmember Phillips at this point.
Madam President, I move that we amend 01005 by substitution.
Second.
Council members received an email copy of the proposed amendment. What this would do, we discussed this during first reading last week, and there were a lot of questions raised. We had some follow-up conversations, and this is an attempt to address a lot of the concerns that came up in first reading. So rather than, it would raise the vending fee to $1,000 effective January 1, 2006, with subsequent annual increases of 3% instead of jumping to $1,500 the following year. There was some concern that having those specific dollar amounts going into the particular, garbage fund and recycling EPA funds, that might be confusing. But since the balance of the money goes to parking enforcement, it's not going to throw anything off to have those specific amounts in there. And if a future council wishes to adjust that in the future, they can. There are 2 other changes. To address the concerns about Halloween, I propose that we change that special conditions may be established by Athens City Council. Previously, it said that the special conditions would be. And then the third thing is related to the use it or lose it clause. Took out the B license vendors so that it just applies to all license holders, and that it would be based on records kept by parking enforcement rather than calculations made by. So those are the changes that I'm proposing. And we've discussed this with several council members in between, and also with Ms. Schaller, who's from AceNet and works with a lot of people who are interested in the possibility of obtaining a vending license.
Could you repeat the last sentence you said, just before you talked about Ms. Schaller? Or do you not have it written down? Oh,
So it just would
Records kept,
change it
okay.
so that the use it or lose it applies to all license
right.
holders,
No, that-
everyone.
The records kept, I have it now, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so we have a proposal to substitute an ordinance. Any discussion on that substitution? From the members of council, yes.
I would like to thank Councilperson Phillips for working on this and coming up with some good suggestions for the changes. And as Debbie knows, I was a little uncomfortable with the allocations of the money to specific places. But then, unless we change the garbage fees, it probably will stand for a while. And so it certainly doesn't sufficiently bother me to negate the rest of the work that's gone into it. And I think there's some positive changes here, and I'm very enthusiastic about the including the A vendors in the use it or lose it, and sincerely hope that this change will encourage people to start using their licenses.
Other comments from council? Audience? Okay. All those in favor of the substitution O-100-05 signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The substitution is, passes 6-0, and the ordinance was read for the first time. O-100-05, an ordinance authorizing funds for engineering of a water line and a pump station for the Columbus Road Water Project number 218. O-102-05, an ordinance authorizing the auditor to borrow up to $75,000 for the Columbus Road Sewer Project, declaring an emergency. O-03-05, an ordinance authorizing engineering of gravity sewer lift station and force main for the Columbus Road Sewer Project number 218. Those are the ordinances for second reading. Now ordinances for first reading. An ordinance amending the 2005 appropriation ordinance. Who's speaking for that?
Oh, is that mine or yours?
If you're prepared to speak to it, go ahead.
Oh, not that one. Okay, the next one. Sorry. It's what happens when you're late, you're confused.
This ordinance amends the appropriation ordinance by appropriating $19,000 to the street fund and increasing the total appropriation by that amount. This will replace funds that were expended from the current appropriations that were used to cover LEDs and pedestrian markings at the crosswalks on Richland and East State. They were unplanned but cost-effective safety features. So it wasn't really part of the original streets budget, but it was something that we felt should happen. So that got spent out of the regular budget, and we're just replacing that money.
Good. Any comments on that? O-105, 05, an ordinance authorizing the Service Safety Director to advertise, accept bids where necessary, and enter into contracts for scoreboards and other donations to be used at recreation facilities in exchange for vending rights. Councilmember Patterson.
I think it's my turn now. And I do apologize for being late, so this is now coming at you as a first reading rather than a committee meeting. But basically, what has occurred is that when the community center opened 5 years ago this week, we had an agreement with Pepsi, actually, for contracts. They had advertising on our scoreboards. They provided product for various events, and a whole contract of services that they provided for the city in exchange for exclusive rights within the city recreation program. What this ordinance is for is to advertise, accept bids, and enter into a contract for the next 4 years. And it includes the scoreboards and other donations. It includes a series of events that take place at various places within the city. One of those is the New Arts West. One activity they will sponsor at Arts West. They also have a 4th of July event, the Halloween event, and several breakfast or lunch with Santa in December, a variety of activities that they sponsor. The total package comes out to about $70,000 worth of sponsorship and activity, things that they contribute to, including a softball team in the summer, and they get the shirts for them and so forth. So this is the opportunity to follow up and do a subsequent 4-year contract, to open bids again so that it is not necessarily the same company. And I might add that I do know that in the case of Arts West and the community center, there are juice and water alternatives to the pop, so it is not exclusively pop, but it is still sponsored by whatever company would be sponsoring this project. Arts West is just juice and water at this point. They haven't given in to the pop concept yet. So that's basically what the ordinance is. Are there questions about that? It's fairly straightforward, and I would like to suspend next week because that contract is ending currently. Yes.
Okay, so this is a bid, and you put this bid out, and you have some kind of bid language already in place?
Right.
And this is for 4 years with a renew option for another 3?
Correct.
And when you say total of $70,000, is that per year, or is that per?
That's the 4-year contract.
4-year contract.
Mhm.
And this is for, I see it talks about scoreboards on West State Street and Community Center, but it doesn't say anything about Arts West. Is that included in the
Arts
bids?
West is included in a list of activities that they would be participating in.
Other comments?
Debbie?
I would just add, I had a conversation with Member Patterson earlier today that I am not entirely comfortable with the marketing of junk food to children, and I think there's a trend now of trying to pull those kind of products out of schools, and I think that it's something that we should think about. I don't know if it necessarily needs to impact a decision that we make today, but I just have a concern in general about encouraging that, consumption of those kind of products.
And I certainly think it's important that we at least address having an alternative, that it not be all pop in those facilities. Any other?
Seems you'll have a week, Debbie. Okay. Any other comments? Well, it appears there is no more business, so we stand adjourned. We have a committee of the whole, Community Foods Initiative, Compost, and Miscellaneous. I assume compost is Jim, and I know who's doing Community Food Initiatives. Bless them.
Go.
Am I supposed to?
Yes, rapid fire, please.
Okay.
Oh,
Stand
okay.
here, Scott, or? I'm fine, okay, great. Well, technology, it's always challenging. I just finished this PowerPoint presentation at 6 o'clock, and I just realized I've used some fonts. The work of the city. There might be a small ask here at the end.
that's
But it's going to be so entwined in the information part of the presentation. It
Thanks,
will
Leslie.
be relatively painless. I've created just a kind of a small handout. The slides are actually in the back of the spiral packet I just handed out, so if you'd like to take a look at that. Again, it looks so much more beautiful on my laptop screen than it does on the wall here. But I'd just like to do a short review of community food initiatives. I come here this evening wearing the chair of the board hat. I know a lot of people are familiar with me through my business and through my work as a director at the Appalachian Center for Economic Networks. But another project that I've worked on since 1992 is a nonprofit that operates in Athens County as community food initiatives. And I know from the great work that a number of council members have done that many of the council is familiar with CFI. But I just want to do a little bit of an update as to where we're at now in 2005, so that if people ask you questions about community food initiatives, you would be able to refer to volunteers within our organization, or hopefully you would be able to answer any questions the community might have about CFI as well. The mission of CFI is really dedicated to people helping them grow their own food. A lot of our project work is centered on the local food economy, but we're very interested in helping people through becoming more self-reliant within the food economy. Do I need to attach the microphone here? Great. I'm usually pretty loud, Scott. Maybe loud enough tonight. Okay, great. So CFI really promotes self-sufficiency as it relates to basic food production, preservation, and preparation. So a lot of our projects have really been revolving around training. The history of CFI is that it started in 1992 as a project of ACENET and then spun off as a separate nonprofit 501c3 in 1995. And it's really been led by its membership. CFI is a very grassroots organization. A lot of the evolution, maturation of CFI has been really engendered, I think, by the people who have been members throughout its history. We're limited in terms of our funding. I always like to say right now we survive on a vaporish budget, but hundreds of incredible volunteers. I would like to see some of that maybe change in the near future. I do think the project work that we're doing right now and some of the excitement we have amongst community members can lead to additional funding. But a lot of our budget right now comes from memberships. We've had a number of religious funders who have supported CFI throughout the years, private foundations, and then CFI partners very explicitly with ACENET Rural Action and the Athens Farmers Market, and that sometimes leverages funds as well. So we've had lots of partners. Some of the programs right now that CFI is running are the community gardens, and obviously I think city officials and city office holders are probably most familiar with the community gardens out on West State Street. We also have a project called the Gardening Angels, and they're really the core of our volunteers. They do a lot of the training, the workshop presentation, participate at all levels on committees and projects. We've reinvented the Edible Schoolyard project in pretty much the last two school seasons. We have an edible garden at East Elementary, and we just started another one in the Trimble local schools, so that would be an Athens County program. We're very interested in seed saving. We've partnered over the years to make sure that there are free seeds and plants that are available to low-income members of our community. We've partnered with ACENET on our Appalachian Harvest project, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. I've actually brought some of the products that have come out of that project, and also community composting. And I think this is probably the project that I would like CFI to work most directly with the city on in future years. The community gardens. Well, we started back in 2002 to really try and reinvigorate the West State Street gardens. In 2003, 2004, we started to expand the gardens. In 2005, we probably have had the most, I would say, expansion of the gardens in terms of usage, more community members having garden plots, and some of the previous garden plot tenders have now expanded. We actually have some folks now selling some of the produce that they harvest from their community garden plot, as well as produce products. So this is pretty exciting. I think one of the things that we would like to see in 2005, 2006 is more of this information captured in terms of its usage. We would like to see maybe additional sites expand in coming years as well. We've had some great funding partners. In 2004, we received a grant from the Athens Foundation, and that allowed us to create a kiosk right along the bike path, and that's been great to communicate what's happening at the garden and about CFI in general. They also provided funds so that we were able to purchase additional tools and a toolbox so that those tools that we had just purchased didn't disappear. You know, sometimes security issues are important. So I think some of those next steps are really how do we continue to improve the West State Street gardens. Since we've had running water in 2004, that's great, not having to carry buckets of water. This year you can see that we had a little bit of a problem with someone backing into that water tap, and we have very artfully created a barrier that I think incorporates little metal rods and beautiful plastic bags. So there's still a lot of work to be done in this location. The gardeners meet on a regular basis. They have community potlucks. And I also included a survey for 2005 so that we can really assess their needs and their interests. Some of the other things that I think can happen with this project is to really identify some other partners. We've had folks from Project Plant, from the Master Gardeners, who have really helped with community gardening. But I would also like to see the neighborhood associations maybe become more engaged. I know a number of community members have mentioned having interest in maybe having community gardens facilitated by CFI in other parts of the city. So those of you out in TV land who are involved with neighborhood associations, please let us know. We would like to partner more explicitly with you on both community gardening and community composting. What I like to do is always add a lot of photographs. To me, you know, the project work is really told by the pictures and stories of the individuals involved. We just recently did a canning workshop this past summer in the Food Ventures Central Kitchen area. Bill Justice is our kitchen manager is in the photo on the left, and he did some training with some other partners on how to can preserves. So I think we had a lot of blackberry jelly and preserves come out. We also had some dillied green beans that were pretty yummy as well. Gardening Angels really help in a lot of different ways, even beyond gardening. But folks are available to help with tilling. Some folks have helped some of the other community gardeners maybe dig up their plots on West State Street. Edible Schoolyard. Again, we did it for many years in the late 90s, and we've just tried to revamp the program, certainly looking for additional support and funding for this project. The Edible Schoolyard Garden, that's probably the oldest right now, is at East Elementary, and we just started a new one at Trimble Local Schools this summer. So we had some beautiful corn and tomatoes, sunflowers, all sorts of things. Some of our volunteers have also gone into the schools to do some nutrition training and also some cooking classes. So I know last fall they made some wonderful acorn squash soup at East Elementary. A lot of the partners in terms of Edible Schoolyard tends to be the teachers, the students. We have cafeteria workers, school nurses, and even some of the neighbors in both of these communities become involved in the Edible Schoolyard project. Seed saving, another great project. A lot of volunteers sort seeds. At the beginning of the spring, we put them in bags, and then they're available at the Athens County WIC office, Jobs and Family Services, at our offices at CFI. If there's folks who want us to have free seeds at other locations, that's also possible. And it's more than just seeds. We have vegetable seeds, we have flower seeds, but we've had tomato starts, pepper starts. I think we've even had potatoes in the past.
for people to use as well. We have a number of farmers in Meigs and Gallia County who have donated a lot of the seeds and many of the tomato, peppers, and potatoes. Appalachian Harvest. Well, this is a really exciting project. I've brought a couple products, some stuff from last year and some of the prototypes for this year. But this has been an incredible project. One of the primary funders for CFI has been through the USDA Community Food Security Project. And this is a partnership with ACENET, with the Meigs Cooperative Parish, with APAC, which is the Appalachian People's Action Coalition, the Kilvert Center, the Gloucester Community Center, the Coolville Food Pantry, and a number of Meigs County farmers. The farmers actually allow the volunteers to come out and glean. This year we did tomato and corn. The 2 years that we've run this project, a lot of CFI, again, gardening angels, they do more than just gardening, come in and process. We've created products for both the food pantries, the variety of community dinners that many of these organizations run throughout the year. And then we also have products for sale. So some of you may already be addicted to the cocktail sauce that we produced last year. This is actually, I think, one of my parents' favorite products of all these years. 50 years of eating shrimp cocktail, and they're like really addicted to this cocktail sauce. This is a limited edition product, so buy it now at the shelf on Kroger, because it's going to run out soon. This year we did a fire-roasted tomato sauce and also a salsa, because, you know, there's just not enough salsa in the city of Athens. So we have one more salsa for all you people who just need to eat hot and spicy food. Okay, community composting. Well, this, I think, is our future. This is one of the areas that CFI really wants to provide leadership in the coming years. We've partnered at this level with the City of Athens, the Ohio EPA, the Athens County Solid Waste District. The Unitarian Universalists have been fantastic. Our local fellowship has really provided both funding and volunteers to make this project work. Diane Stafford of UUFA has just been an incredible person. I know many of you know her and are familiar with her work, but she's really been, she is like, I would say, the archangel of the community composting project. The AM Rotary has supported this. We also have had a lot of folks come from SEPTA, actually helping us build compost bins, churn compost. Just last week, bag beautiful compost now available in many locations for you to use. And many of the restaurants, the Food Venture Center, also have participated either by having volunteers come and pick up their compost or participating through donations. Here's the UUFA Bucket Brigade. We have lovely green buckets for composting. So we have probably about 20 locations right now, whether it's the Food Venture Center or local businesses that are composting some of their food wastes. So the reduction of food waste going into landfill might just be a little trickle at this point, but I think it's engaging a lot of interest, especially with commercial businesses that want to figure out how to do a better job composting their scraps. Just this past weekend, Rory Lewandowski from our Co-op Extension Office provided a composting workshop. And I think, again, this is a direction that we feel very committed to. We need to do more education on backyard composting for residents in our community. We also need to really work with commercial partners to figure out what is the vision for composting within the city of Athens and Athens County. So, pretty exciting, lots of stuff happening. Incredible group of volunteers in each one of these projects. We very much appreciate the work of Councilmember Sands and Bain for doing the work that they've done thus far, and look forward to partnering with them a little bit more. Certainly there's opportunities for other council members to assist on some of these projects. There's a lot of different things I think that you can become engaged in. So how can you really assist us? Well, I think one of the things that we continue to need, and again, when I've talked to some of the council members to be on the agenda tonight, this is a great opportunity for us to have this airtime. A lot of folks watch council meetings. So if you're interested in becoming a CFI member, we will be available this Saturday at the Athens Farmers Market. And for a small membership, you can have the premium of top grade 5 pounds of community compost. Great time of the year too, transplanting, putting bulbs in, it's just black gold. So certainly help us in terms of getting the word out. If you're interested in seeing the community gardens expand, if you're interested in participating on the community composting project, we really need to be connected to resources and more expertise. I would like to be able to look for additional support letters in the months to come, probably within the next year. I would like to apply for additional funding for both community composting and for the community gardening projects. And if you can identify maybe in-kind funds that we could use in some of these funding applications, that always is of great assistance as well. So that's pretty much my presentation this evening. I hope I stayed a little bit on time. That's why I have PowerPoints to sort of move me along so that I don't riff too much. I've brought goodies. Hopefully those of you who came in to the audience a little bit later, if you need a little bit of a sugar buzz, don't want to walk out with this stuff, so please imbibe. I also have community composting brochures and CFI membership brochures. I have a couple additional handouts on the gleaning project as well that CFI partners with ACENET and all those other wonderful partners on. So thank you, and again, appreciation. We really enjoy working with the City of Athens and look for continued progress on some of these projects. Do you folks have any questions for me?
Leslie,
Mm-hmm.
how many people do you think compost percentage-wise in the city? Do you have any data of that? or
We
an
don't
idea?
really have any survey data on that at this point. A lot of the project with the Unitarian Fellowship has been to identify restaurants and food manufacturers to compost.
So that's more commercial then?
It's been more commercial at this point. I think the direction we're headed right now is to look for funding to do education on backyard composting so that we can have more residents start to compost within their own backyards. And also just that sort of educational evolution, I think, too, that if you start to do your own composting, if in some day in the future we have curbside pickup of compostable materials, then they would be ready to go with that. What I would like to do this year is apply for another Ohio Environmental Educational Fund grant that would focus both on residential and maybe some commercial composting.
Okay.
I look forward also to maybe identifying some folks at Ohio University that maybe we could do some survey work. A lot of the community surveys that have been conducted in partnership with ILGARD thus far has been more on community gardening. So we might be due to do some stuff on community composting next. But we need funding.
Thank you, Leslie. Okay, I guess I'm on for a little more on composting. As Leslie said, CFI and Unitarian Fellowship developed this program over 2 years ago, and Council became aware of it shortly after that. We, as council members, have talked for years about how we could compost some of the leaves and yard waste that we pick up annually. And so we started meeting with CFI composting group about how we might partner to do that. And it's been more logistically difficult than any of us anticipated. Obviously, funding is a problem, and locating a space to do this. We've had representatives from the county and the university who have also faithfully attended these meetings and expressed great interest in this larger cooperative group going toward curbside pickup at some date. We do pick up leaves and yard waste. An estimate from Ray Hazlett is that could cost as much as $200,000 annually for the time, for the labor and the equipment utilized. And so it has some financial sense to it also. We continue that work. Right now, the group's efforts are engaged in this educational effort. As Leslie pointed out, it's an evolutionary kind of thing we're looking for, developing some interest in backyard composting, making people aware of the benefits of the larger picture. So a lot of possibilities, a lot of information. If you all are interested, we'd be happy to get that to you. And that's where we are. Paul?
I think I'm a member of CFI. Somewhere along the line, I gave them some money, and I'm on their email.
And you get minutes from
Yeah.
the composting group.
So I know that there's been some road trips to other cities that do this. What do theirs look like, since I haven't made it to any of those road trips? Do you have any? Did you make it to any, or are you aware?
I haven't, but we've had plenty of show and tell afterwards. What do they look like? Some of them are private enterprise, some of them are community run. They're 5 to 50 acres, and most of them are pretty low tech. They're windrows of compostable material that needs to be turned on some regular basis with some large equipment, and then some grinding to reduce that. But a lot of them report tremendous sales of product. And obviously, the ones who are in it commercially are finding it profitable. So it's probably a viable project as we move into it slowly.
Okay. And in terms of waste stream, how much, besides, you're just talking about mostly leaves and yard waste, or?
Yeah, you get into different classifications of composting. It's all, of course, regulated by the Environmental Protection Agency. You need a license, and it depends on the materials that you're composting, what level, and that, of course, ratchets up the cost, and et cetera. So we're looking at beginning the larger project with leaves and yard waste, then probably expanding to take in some of the sources that CFI has already identified.
Presently, where is our yard waste going for the most part? It just goes in a landfill, I see? or-
It goes to Canaanville site and gets plowed under pretty much.
Okay.
Grows nice corn.
Mm.
Okay, that's really it at this point.
Thanks.
Thanks for doing it.
Could I, this is the committee of the whole, so can I make a miscellaneous?
Yeah.
I think everybody knows that tomorrow night we have a special committee meeting at 7 o'clock. It's ostensibly a planning and development committee, but really, council always works as a committee of the whole, so we'll all be here. It's a special meeting to discuss further the proposed retirement center proposed for Stimson Avenue. Our goal is to formulate an ordinance that we can then begin the process of 3 readings, culminating in a vote sometime late this year. We've taken input from proponents and opponents for several months now. We continue to get that, and we'll continue to have public comment throughout the rest of this process. But tomorrow night is a committee meeting where council will be laboring to come to some consensus. So there will be opportunities for input, but it's not a public hearing as we've had in the past. And council members, Debbie Walker has put together just a proposed ordinance, just with the basic language that came to us from the Planning Commission. We're just going to use that as a starting point. We can mark it up however we want, but you have one of those just to kind of start the discussion with tomorrow night. So 7 o'clock in these chambers. Thank you.
Jim, I did ask her to look up the language that we used at the library when we granted land for a specific purpose, not to have it shifted to another one. And she'll
Okay.
be bringing that back too.
Good.
That was one thing I
Because
was-
I have some information from the law director regarding that, too.
Yeah, he wrote the last one, so I'm sure it'll be
Yeah.
the same thing.
Okay. And that's the miscellaneous for me.
Debbie,
Yes, okay. So are we done with the committee of the whole?
we are done.
Okay. We're now going to move into a Finance and Personnel Committee. The agenda item that I have is reviewing our timeline for working on the 2006 budget. Everyone on council received a copy of this last week, and Dale talked through this a little bit. So in addition to actually looking over the items that we need to cover, that we had talked a little bit about starting to talk about some of the fees and fines and things that we might be able to actually know now about revenue. But we just need to first kind of look through and see if this actually covers everything that we need to discuss while we're working on the budget, and see if there are any other issues we need to work into this, and try to figure out the actual timeline, make sure that that's going to be squared away to get through this by the end of the year. Item 1 covers different areas of revenue, just general fund revenue, fees for service and fines, the community center, the parking garage, grants, the TIF, any other sources of revenue, and carry forward estimates. So that's all on the revenue side. We will get different pieces of information at different points in time. We're not going to have all of that information right now because it gets a lot clearer as we get closer to the end of the year. In the second section is about continuing expenditures and allocations. We need to look at the mix, how we allocate the revenue from the income tax, how that money is going to flow into different funds, what we're going to do in terms of inheritance tax. We need to look at other ongoing the inheritance tax thing is there because it may make more sense to put that into cap because it's something that is not consistent over time. We need to look at medical benefits, personnel, including our pay scale, the staffing levels, overtime, any initiatives that would actually create kind of an ongoing expense. And there's kind of a catch-all other expenditures in there. And then the third category are one-time expenditures, any proposed projects that are coming, any continuing projects that have begun, and we may have some sense of what those are going to cost, but they're not long-term. Sidewalks and street paving, vehicle and equipment replacement, water and sewer projects, match money for grants, an analysis of the condition of our buildings, and any other one-time expenditures. So I guess first of all, are there general areas that don't seem to be reflected in this? Are there other things that we need to be considering as we go through the process of developing the budget? Paul?
Okay, I guess if we're looking at expenditures and allocations of resources, we're not looking at it department by department, we're looking at in terms of personnel versus capital versus, I guess, I wonder, okay, in terms of 2.1, for instance, general fund allocation, I mean, that will cover everything really for the most part, right? and how we divvy that up and what we do with it? Or is that just the
That's
mixed
the
tax
mix of what
Okay.
we're going to do in terms of what percentage of the income tax goes into each of those funds.
Okay.
And then there are some broad issues around personnel, like staffing levels and the pay scale, that will affect all of the department budgets.
Mhm. Okay.
So those, I mean, I think that we do get into, as we get closer to the end, specific department budgets, but there are some kind of overarching questions that we have to discuss and make decisions about before we get there.
Okay.
Anything that you would add at this point, either Auditor Hecht or Mayor Abel?
I think one of the most important things to look at is that, and I'm working on this now, is that if we take the current staffing that we have funded in last year's budget, project that with all normal step increases, one of the hard parts of that is we're in negotiation both with police and fire, so I have to estimate what those settlements might be. And then just look at that as if revenue were stagnant, i.e. take a look at what we've got through September of this year, do a little, just divide by 9 and multiply out where applicable and say, okay, that's where we're going to be. And then see where that budget is. And then we begin to work on the revenue side of it to take a look at some of the fees that which we are charging in various funds. General fund, we've done a study last year that came to the Finance Committee, I don't know, maybe June of this year or so. Had some specific things with respect to the Code Enforcement Office. Looked at recreation a little bit, but it was also a general study of our cost allocation mix. And that's a potential source of revenue or expense, depending upon who's paying whom. We also wanted to look at, in the revenue side, some of the different things that have been stagnant for a number of years. Some of our parking charges or for fines are the same that they were 15 to 20 years ago. It's still $20 if you park on a yellow line that it was 15 years ago. And we compare that by looking at some of the other cities in the area or looking at Ohio University charges. And then look at what our projection of the changes are in the system that we've instituted in early July in our parking enforcement collection pattern, which I think through September was up about 18,000 over the previous year, which is, but this is just starting, and then get some projections on that. Then we have to be able to look at the staffing areas from the standpoint of, the first thing that Debbie mentioned was, 6 years ago, council asked us to do a pay study and make a recommendation to you for ranges, and we did an evaluation of every employee in the city, and then did slotting and everything. We've stuck with the same parameters on that for 5 years. And last year, we recommended to change those ranges because we were beginning to fall behind in our beginning salaries and somewhat in our top in the first 4 of the 7 or 8 pay ranges. And we sent that recommendation up, but last year, as you recall, the revenue side of the finances was stagnant in the respect of the income tax, and in fact, by year end came in at a negative figure versus the previous year, so nothing was done on that. If the initial look at that is, we need to really look at that, because that will then impact, okay, am I bringing people in at higher salaries? Do I make what kind of adjustment to those? It'd be a fair-sized discussion, and then at the top end, those that are at their maximum pay right now, how much to do that. So that's a real big part because it affects 70, 80 employees that are under our non-union pay scales. The other side in the expenses, as I think Debbie and Dale have mentioned in the way they went down through that, is we have to be able to track those ongoing expenses. And it looks right now that some of the key elements are energy-based. The electric company has already said they're doing increases. Gas from natural gas is going up, let alone gasoline for our fuel for our vehicles are going up. So some of those we have to pay particular attention to, also along with health insurance costs. Some of the others, should be fairly more normal in scope and size. Then once you get all that done, you really start looking at the capital budgets. And there's really one capital budget for the entire general fund. And then there are a series of capital budgets for the street department, water department, sewer department, garbage potentially, and recreation, both the community center and general recreation purposes. And at that point, then you're just really paring down based upon projections made by the auditor's office of carryover balances, revenue, and those expenses you're doing, and then you find out, is there anything left to do one-time type projects? The only position area that I can really see within the city that we definitely need to take a look at, because it is a budgeted position, and at the time that vacancy was coming up, I had told council we would not hire into that this year, and I've not done any advertising in the GIS position. But I have talked to the county engineer, who is the head chairman of the county GIS committee, and their main contractor, the Ilgard Institute, to talk about fee-based for services for specific things that we would like out of that. It's also in looking at our overall hardware and software programs within the city. We have some core software programs, like municipal court is with one company and has a maintenance contract and everything with them. Utility billing is with that same company with a different software module, and then the auditor's office is with a different company. And all three of those have been updated within the last 2.5 years. But that needs kind of a little bit of coordination. Then everybody else in the city is in their own platform with the email and everything else. And part-time wise, the government channel has been monitoring that as it keeps growing, because we're up to probably 130 different computers within the city right now. And we really need to kind of look at, okay, can you take the mechanisms of GIS from the standpoint of not collecting and massaging the data, but getting it out to both public and to department heads? Put that with the other factors we have, and is that something that instead of the GIS position, we need to have an overall information technology position within the city with some contracting out with Ilgard or others from the standpoint of GIS. So that's one issue with where we're maybe reprogramming existing positions and funds. The other area that council has said a number of times they wanted to take a close look at was a planner. That would be a new position, but again, there is some potential for revenue in that position too, in the respect that there is a value, but you start out small and go into a learning curve on that one. But that's something that you'll probably want to take a look at. And then if there are other items, but each department head has been preparing their capital budgets for me. I've got most of them in hand now. I have a pretty good handle on the expense side of it. I've got some work yet to do because I'm just not sure where this gasoline price is going. And if we should be really looking at some alternatives there. There are a couple special projects that I've got some task force recommendations on that I want to be able to make a half-hour presentation to council on, one of those being Stroud's Run State Park. That task force is pretty well done. So we want to look at some of those, but I think the basics that we have to look at first is funding our current positions, looking at our current revenue and some idea of where it's going, and then seeing where we do have money to be able to do some programs or activities. I think a good example is like a month ago when I presented to you the street rehab programs and where we were for 2006 and beginning in 2007, and because those are longer-term projects that we have to start on, get ODOT funding or other outside grant funding. For example, I got the first round of issue 2 funds for this year. Remember I told you that too? And they have this point ranking for it, and we were funded by being ranked number 3 or 3rd project in the county with the one around the middle school, which received 400 points. Well, the one we just submitted got 410 points. So it's just as strong an application. So the next step is to work with the county committee on that and see if, we can get that next area of West Union Street in good shape. So that 60,000 or so that I was in there now looks a little stronger for potential funding. But that's just my general comments. I mean, we can talk a little bit about some of those specific fees or things if you wish, but I think you have to do it sort of in a step-by-step. You don't start out, we're going to add 5 people and then figure out how to do it. Let's first find out how well we've got it covered for what we've got before we take those other steps.
I want to double check also on the timeline, I guess, before we get into a specific thing. We're looking at trying to have an ordinance up for first reading by December 5th. This is on the second page of the outline. And we have scheduled that the auditor thought she would be able to have some revenue projections by October 24th. I wanted to see if that still seems like a likely timeline. So we'll be able to look at some of that at our next committee meeting. And then when do we need to really look at the overall staffing levels and non-union pay scale in the process of trying, because you're starting to try to pull things together from the departments?
We really want to look at that by the end of the month at the latest. I think the next thing that I have to do is, because the auditor's reports for the 3rd quarter came out Friday, or at least that's when I got them. Now I have to do that 3rd quarter analysis, just like I did the 2nd quarter, and do multiple years for you, so that you have that, so you have some good ideas of where our expenses and revenues going through the first 9 months of this year is in comparison to at least 3+ other years. I'm almost done with a lot of the things on the bare bones, just keep everything as we are, make very little changes to the 200 and 300 series, i.e. services and other expenses. And that definitely will be ready probably, I'm saying by the 1st of November, you will have that.
Okay.
And if we have the auditor's revenue projections updated through that a little bit from when she presents on the 17th, no, 20th, whatever, 24th, then we can really tie pretty much together, and then we got about 3 weeks to put the package together.
Okay. We've got the opportunity to have a committee meeting on the 31st. Would that be a good time to look at the staffing levels and the pay scale, or is that going to be pushing
that'd be
things?
fine.
Okay. Because that seems like something that we're going to need to devote a chunk of time.
Well, see, and that'll make them if it does then I've got 70, or I don't know, up to 70 changes potentially within the document I've already got. But that's what we really need. It's front-loaded to know that we can do the other things.
The other thing we could do, if people want, is to have some committee meetings early before regular council meetings. If we need to try to get some of this done earlier in October, we could meet before the council meeting next week.
But you're starting a month earlier than we've ever started before, so.
So does this?
And I don't know, I think these discussions often run longer than a half an hour. It's difficult to contain them in a half hour.
So let's see how it goes, and then maybe
I
we can
think,
go
Jim,
again.
what Dale and I had talked about was when there's a time to make a presentation to you, just to
Okay.
provide the information.
Yeah,
That within a half-hour time frame, maybe we start at 6:45, And if Kathy or I have something that we have now packaged and put together, and we can get out to you at least that day earlier, if not the Friday before, so that then present it and walk through it with you, see what, if there's any questions. But I think you're right. If we're just having a general discussion on a topic without a presentation to you, it isn't going to work. But I know that there are a couple items there in that time frame that I can think of making presentations to you. And that's really were you willing to come in 45 minutes or so ahead and use half an hour or so for a presentation, take a 10 or 15-minute break, and go into council meeting.
That's a different thing than I was
Yeah.
thinking of.
That's what my thinking was with Dale and Debbie and Kathy when we met late last week, or 2 weeks ago, I guess.
Okay. I guess and we've got several committee meeting nights that we can continue to work on this as we've got new pieces of information. The one thing that the mayor suggested that I bring from the Maximus study tonight was their recommendations in the area of code enforcement. And Maximus is the company that did that cost allocation study. They actually looked at what services different departments are using that could be billed, like how much we charge for personnel services to different departments. So that's one whole piece of that study, is really how we are billing things internally from one fund to another. And then the other piece, they really looked at the fines and the fee structures that are in place. And the area where they came up with a lot of differences and recommendations is largely in code enforcement. And part of the discussion has been, this may be a place to look for some of the funding to hire a planner, is actually bringing some of the fees for services from the code enforcement office into line with the actual costs that we incur when people make different applications. And, it requires a review of city personnel and an investment of our time. They've made a list of recommendations where they compare our current fee to what it actually costs to provide that service, and then they have a suggested fee. We could, of course, not go as high as they're suggesting on some of these, but these are the levels that they think would be easy to justify in terms of the actual cost that the city's incurring to provide this to people. And I don't know if you want to say more about this specifically.
I really just want to do a little bit of the methodology that they did on it.
Okay.
What they did was I gave them the report by code for at least a 3-year period of how many permits were issued in every area that we can issue permit as a city. So they had a 3-year baseline of data. And I gave them what we are currently charging for each one of those, and gave them the budget for 2004. And from that, they then came in and conducted interviews with the code director and each one of the code enforcement officers and with the support personnel in the office to have them walk through and describe what they do, how long it takes them to do the average one of these of each thing. They took all this data and then compiled that, running with the budget. In addition to the budget, they did take some things into consideration that when Steve and I last did our own internal analysis, we did not, and primarily that's capital items. There's so many cars there, and they cost so much money to buy, and they're going to last so long, and there's a building, and there's equipment that are in there. There's capital that we've spent to create the code office, and then over what time period should all of that be costed out and included within the cost of the fees. And that is the area that Steve and I did not consider, plus we just used our own best judgment in saying how long it took to do things and how the frequencies, et cetera, where they did actual in-depth employee interviews. And so that's what's the basis of that is. In the full report, which I have, it's got all those mathematical calculations and such if anybody wants to look through them all. They're there, all the spreadsheet analysis and data. But it really boils down to the sheet that Debbie has passed out, which is their recommendation as to the maximum to charge for that in each one of those particular areas. And you can see there's some reductions to fees and there are some increased fees. Nancy?
Question about, first of all, the alarm. Initial permit, that would be home alarms,
Or business alarms. We don't differentiate between the two.
as in burglar alarms?
Yes.
But we don't
It's-
really do anything with it, do we? I mean, I don't even know why we're charging a fee. One of my neighbors actually asked me about that.
Well, and I've talked to her too.
Yes.
But, well, what happens on most of these that are set up is that they are usually with a service. And this service calls us and says, it's ringing. Now, that goes back into police or fire who has to go out and check it. So it's, what we were looking at was to issue the initial permit or do a renewal of it. And our volumes there were like 12 initial and 138 annual reviews or annual renewals. So, and I don't remember, that came in low or high?
Low, way low. I mean, I just wanted to know what the rationale was on that. I've got a couple other questions, but it seems to me that that one, because we just send it off to an existing, they could even dial 911 and bypass us, right? And say that it's, but they probably wouldn't. I guess they wouldn't dial 911 because that
I've
might be.
had questions
Well,
about
in
that one
different-
as well.
Yeah,
But I do think a reduction from 50 to 15 would
it's good.
make a big difference.
It's probably, I mean, it's not something where we're doing an awful lot of work, I don't think. I mean.
Well,
okay.
no, that's what the analysis really said. And in each one of these, there is, and there's a copy in the office. And I think the booklet you have has both Parks and Recreation and Code Office in it, which are the two areas we targeted.
No, I don't have any problem. I just want to make sure we were talking about the same thing, because it seems the fire alarms are another totally different.
Yeah, actually, yeah, this is just issuing of the permit and making sure all of the, the rules and they're looked at.
Okay, how
That
about,
then triggers a whole separate thing of, I mean, there's another section of code, like in the fire codes, that talks about false alarms, or you don't have a good alarm system, and it's rang us 20 times in the last 3 months, and
every time a
we're
low
getting
pressure
tired of
cell.
coming, you know.
Every time a low pressure cell comes through, some of them ring. Okay, what about plumbing inspections, the last two? I didn't know we did those, and so I just want to know where they're coming from. It says plumbing inspection for remodeling of residences, 50 and 80.
Mhm.
Do we do that? Do we have a
On
plumbing
those that
inspector?
are not state-issued permits, yes.
Okay, and who does it? Who does the?
Well, it was being done during that study time period by Chuck Miller, who's since retired, and I think Hal is doing those now.
Okay, well, then the big one for me is the zoning board variance request, which seems to me to be pretty steep. And I actually have a second question after this, and it seems to me that there have been some decisions made, to send not only the code enforcement head, but also a code enforcement officer on overtime, and hence the price goes up considerably. And so I wonder, just as a citizen who many citizens would like to have their property rights confirmed by the zoning board, what they see as a reasonable use of their property. And this does seem a tad high. Having sat through them, maybe we ought to pay the zoning board members each $500 a night because of the, sometimes just the pure tedium of it all. 3 people on this council could probably attest to that. But having said that, I wonder if there's not an intermediate spot or a different way to organize or deploy our personnel to not incur such a large charge for such an important part of land use law.
And this probably doesn't include the lawyer that's usually attending as well.
Oh, yes. I don't know. That's the only one that I really have trouble with.
Well, I think these are also a suggestion of what it's costing us. I think that we can make a decision about what's a reasonable level to
Well,
set the fee at.
Yeah, and that was exactly my point when I talked about deploying the resources that we have. It's not I understand that very well, but I want to make sure that, this is not a reasonable amount of money to be asking for.
Especially from 0.
Yeah,
No,
to
they said-
500?
Well, it's $15,
It's
but
15 right now.
it's two places.
Oh,
Well, yeah, but it's
okay,
basically
okay.
the,
Yeah, zoning
and
board of
so,
appeals.
I don't know that a zoning, if
No,
the
you're right,
administration chooses to send, or the head of the code enforcement chooses to send another code officer along with him,
Oh, here.
the officer himself, I mean, that's pretty pricey. And so, maybe it has to come out of his travel budget or something, I don't know. Who knows where it would come from, but that's the only one that really sticks in my throat. Not that I've ever asked for one, but it just seems that people would like to. I mean, often do, and it's tedious, but it's local government.
Zoning board variance request is in two places, and one time it's free and the other time it's $15.
Yeah.
Just a little detail,
Yeah.
housekeeping here.
Which fee number is that? Does it have a number?
We don't have
No,
a number.
They're not numbers.
Okay, back in the detail
It's on
section.
page
they are.
22, the back end. of
Yeah,
this.
D's, the D, Appendix D, it looks like.
Yeah.
And then while you're thumbing through, I would assume then that these fees do not include the cost of us sending a plan out for independent review by Burgess
No.
and Nyepel.
No, it
Good,
does not.
that's good, I'm for it. Except for the zoning board, that's the only thing I have a problem with.
And you're suggesting that in the next month and a half that we decide on all of these fees and change them?
Yeah.
Just-
If you want to put it in next year's budget, yes.
Right.
Definitely.
Okay.
You know.
Are you reading a lot of ordinances real quick in terms of fees?
Well, don't we have a
Right.
single fee page?
I think that the only one that is of major, that it really is important to look at from the standpoint of, it's an annually billed fee, is the rental inspection fee. Because we bill that in December. You know, that's when those bills start going out for payment in January and February. The others are almost, I think, other than a couple of these, renewal of permit type things, which again are on an annual basis, are created by work and activities that are going on.
Well, to me, some of the ones that I would be most enthusiastic about are some of the plan reviews that we haven't been charging any kind of fee for, and the cost of doing business is significant.
Yep.
Right. Well, and see, this is part of the thing that gets back into the zoning board request reviews. I mean, just reviewing the application is one, one facet, but then if it's rejected and the person decides to appeal, there's usually lengthy meetings with that person. And it's not just at the zoning board that the time gets chewed up a lot, and a lot of that is the director. Really, as a cost savings move, we did more of we used to have a person that was a half-time or better and was assigned to a lot of different boards and commissions, and that's all they did was take minutes and notes. But then when that position became vacant, each one of those different departments then took over some of those, and depending upon who could do it in each one, did the costs, and then they're at night, so they're overtime, or the person takes comp time for it. But you have to count it the same way from a cost standpoint. But yeah, we can break down, it's broken down in Appendix 3, page 10, of the detail as to the hours, and because it really is the director and the code inspector is all the time that's really involved in those.
Yeah, and I just think it's not, I mean, I think it's a choice about allocation of resources that somebody has made, sort of Sarah forward. And I just think there are other ways to do it. I also follow up Carol's comment. I think it was very correct. And I would say that if you check Fairfield County and some of the other counties around us, that some of the fees that we've had nothing on now are going to 150 are low. I mean, we are low compared to them.
Well, that's a different type of analysis. I mean,
Yeah.
and that's what we've done sometimes in the past, but it's just like the city of Marietta right now is coming to us and say, we're trying to put together a housing inspection thing. Teach us how you do it.
Oh, dear.
I mean, we're the leader in some of these things.
I wouldn't know about it.
Well,
I
I'm
mean-
just saying the peers out there are coming to us in some of those areas and saying, how do you functionally do this? Because really, a housing, building inspection, really housing inspection office the size that we have is unique within the state of Ohio. I mean, Bowling Green's been to see us, Marietta's been to see us, Portsmouth's been to see us. I mean, you may not look at them as some of the leaders in the field, but the rest of the state does.
Well, I mean, very few people have 75% of their units being rental. And
Sure.
so, I mean, no wonder it's so big. But is this going to stand up to the scrutiny of the law, similar to the lawsuit we've had? I mean, I know they found it to be so, but last time I remember we were pretty close.
Meaning the rental.
Well, the
Yes.
court held that our analysis was one based upon cost. And therefore, all this is saying, instead of doing this internally, we've now hired an outside firm who is a recognized cost allocation and does it for almost every county in the state of Ohio and establishes not overtime, but overhead rates for almost every county in the state of Ohio and many municipalities. I mean, it actually, I think, gives more weight to the fact that, yeah, this is what we're really spending on it. I mean, you can always elect that, okay, the zoning appeals are such general in nature that you don't feel that there should be much of a charge for it. That's council's decision. I'm just saying, the way we're operating it now and the way it's doing it, this is what it's costing us. That's all this report really tells you.
So we could come back in a couple weeks with a proposal, with some,
It's got to be sooner than that.
do you want to have an additional committee meeting like next week before council?
Well,
To actually look at, this is what Maximus said was justifiable. This isn't necessarily the recommendation.
But the mayor just said that he had to have something very early in December, at least part of these. So other than the zoning board, and which is an administrative decision to use their resources the way they've chosen to do it. And I'd like to have them come back and tell us, other than that, I have no problem with any of them. Maybe someone else does, but who's here?
Hello? Jim, you looked like you wanted to say something.
Oh, I was just agreeing that I think that's a lot, and I think it's our decision I think it's our place to make a decision on what we want to charge, and I don't necessarily think that a request for a zoning variance is such a common thing that we could look at a less thing. I think it's a basic thing that a lot of homeowners see as use of their property rights, and some of these homeowners don't have a lot of money to throw around. So I think we need to keep that rate very reasonable. Even $100 is maybe too much for some people. But I don't think it's an allocation of resources. Having been on the Board of Zoning Appeals and dealt with several of those cases, I don't doubt that there's more than this put into some cases, and then less. So this is an average, obviously, but
Right.
it takes an awful lot of time to research for the code office, just as it does for the members of the Board of Zoning Appeals. Thank goodness they're not asking for a raise. But,
Yeah, from nothing to nothing.
yeah, we could give them 5 times what they're making now.
But don't you think, Jim, that this comes from, I mean, in the olden days, they'd have run a tape recorder or else the video camera, and that would become the record. And then you would go beyond that.
Well, yeah, we are paying a member of
Premium
that
prices.
office overtime to take the minutes.
Probably
yeah.
two.
But anyway, what we're looking at is some fee, and I just pulled $100 out of the air. So
I would have said 50, but 100 sounds good.
That's why he's here.
He came for the snacks.
He saw the snacks on TV and came in.
If we're on the zoning board thing, right now it's what, $15? I don't know if 100, I think 100 would be excessive. There's 2 points of it. One is that there are people out there who are business people who are going for the variances, and therefore they can absorb the cost, but there's other people who don't have the wherewithal, and this is their appeal. This may be their last appeal before they go to, the next one is the Court of Common Pleas, of course, which would get much more pricey. But,
We might have fewer requests by a lot.
Yes, we would, exactly. And I think that that's taking away a person's a potential for asking for something. And I agree with Paul that $100 is a lot in some cases, and as with other things, maybe there needs to be a recognized
Well-
scale where it can be scaled back. I don't know.
Let me ask, look, we'll take another look at this in respect, talk to the code director, because I know there are times when they do a zoning board of appeals, they bring their own attorneys with them, and they aren't costing any $50 an hour or anything.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you've served on there, but it's been a few years, but there is a propensity that this is something, you know, something you really want. You might have your attorney with you, which is going to cost you a lot more than probably the $500 we're talking about. But let's take a look at what that all
Yeah.
is, and we can take, you know, we could have things transcribed. We could record it. It is obviously recorded by the government channel, but sometimes words get missed because people's mic's not on and they're switching from topic to topic. And, you know, do you want a verbatim transcript, or do you want, this is the essence of the discussion type of a transcript?
And I had a question for the mayor. Did the Maximus people, you gave them 3 years of permits issued. Did they give you a ballpark figure as if we issued those same number of permits at these rates, where we would be with gross income?
Yes, they did.
I don't have that book with me, so I don't
I know.
go to that page.
Well, they're saying that basically the current revenue on all of the fees on the time period they did was $225,000 roughly. Our cost was $692, so we were running a deficit in their minds of $467,000. And so revenue at recommended fee would be $377,000, and then we'd have additional revenue of $152,000 if you took every one of theirs and went to exactly what their recommended fee was. Which still means you're subsidizing that operation
Still
by
have a
about
deficit.
100,000 plus, because what they're saying, there's enough general stuff we do for the public and time spent on things and internal buildings, et cetera, that are just a cost of providing that service overall to the residents at home.
Thank you.
And this, if I understand, is just really covering the aspect of code. That's it, that you're looking at right now.
Well, when they look at their total cost, they go in and say a couple of things that when you look at the code office budget, it isn't $692,000. It's in the $400,000 range, about $500,000. But they're going in there and saying, okay, there's these capital items that I talked about earlier. But there's also, how do they get their paychecks? How do all their bills get paid? It's the auditor's office. So what percentage of time and that number of employees with that number of things of the auditor's costs should they bear? And along with, you know, do they use the law director's office? Yes, they certainly do, because they have to prepare, you know, cases for court. So some percentage of the law director's time in there. There's general administration by my office and the personnel director. So there is a whole cost allocation analysis done citywide that even where we're not charging, we don't charge the code office for the auditor's time, but in this analysis to determine real cost of doing business in that thing, they did.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know.
Yeah.
And do we have the entire report?
I think it's in the third floor. I thought it was.
There's there's two different books, three different books really, but there is one that is just has community center and recreation in it, and code office, okay? Then there is another overall cost allocation books done under two methodologies, one for federal required reporting if it's ever reimbursable overhead cost, and then there's another one that is done for establishing the fees and internally is approved by the state of Ohio. So on that one is where we come up with, this is the cost of the code office. You know, and I have those at my office. I think I dropped one off to Dale, but whether it was, as the auditor's office will tell you, highly technical. And there was real questions in methodology, even in my mind, with respect to how do you count a full-time versus a part-time employee. From a payroll standpoint, it doesn't matter. You've got the same amount of time invested in it. But from a lot of other standpoints, there's a lesser amount of time and effort that you're putting in.
We didn't find a copy of that in the council office, so I did make one copy that I'll leave on the table back there that has those appendices and
Dale stole
the
it.
methodology. So,
Talk about
Didn't I
the
give you this
cookies.
Maximus report?
What you gave me was was not it wasn't what I know what you want. You want where they've allocated the costs and it's the rationale for the fees.
No, I didn't give you
You didn't give me that.
the code one? No, okay.
No, I don't have that one. I have one, it's not with me, I'll bring it back. But I don't think it adds to this, I'm
I
not
have
sure
it
it adds to
downstairs
this.
anyway, so it doesn't make any difference. I mean, if
Okay.
anybody wants to go
Pile of
through
numbers.
they're more than welcome.
the other question that came up when we spoke this afternoon was in looking at this kind of assessment of costs, whether we want to actually do that with some of the departments. Would council, rather than council and the administration trying to figure out what it costs for water and sewer, would it make sense to do a study like this on those costs? To actually have somebody look at the service that we're providing and what it costs to provide that service?
Right.
So
I
that's a
think it-
question.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. It provides a transparent and rational basis to make a change if you feel like you need to make a change. I mean, that's what the reports we're talking about, I think, do that. It can be readily explained to someone why something costs what it does. Not that we're not doing a good job of that now, but I think to have sort of an independent set of eyes look at it could be useful to us.
But doesn't this type of study cost money? I thought this was, the Maximus thing, wasn't that, what, 40,000 last
Oh,
year,
no.
2 years? No, what was it?
No, it was like 14 for all three studies.
Okay.
12 or 14. I'd have to look it up.
Yeah, I think Paul, it's a good point. Any study you have to do, you have to weigh whether it's going to give you enough better information to make it worthwhile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, for
That's the question
example,
I'm asking.
if you're talking water or sewer from the standpoint of, there's a lot of engineering firms that do cost analysis because of OWDA loans, which we have a few of. And so they have the ability to go in and do something like with water and sewer that would be just to cover all your debt services and normal maintenance and some other things. This is what you need to do over a period of time. The Maximus study is a different focus point on it. They're really looking at cash flow in the one where the other is looking at total cost. And there is a difference. But I could get some price quotes from different firms and/or from Maximus to come back in and do that. I think with the light of doing Columbus Road, and that's on its way to being done next year, yep, we're going to wind up with about a $200,000 that we have to put in, and right now, it's just not there. We don't have that much flexibility in the sewer budget.
So information on what it would cost to have a study done would be really helpful.
Yeah.
Sure.
And that's an item, depending on its cost, we could do in this year. I mean, depends on the cost.
How long did it take last time to do it?
What was the time, what was the completion?
On the Maximus, it was
Yeah.
a fairly lengthy time
That's what I
period,
thought.
So we can pay
because
that
it was the
next
first time being done here, et cetera. Now, if you're doing one that's for an OWDA, because we've already done those before and have had a couple different firms do them, it would really be an update of what we've received before, so it wouldn't be as time-consuming or probably as costly.
I was thinking if we could encumber it and get it under this budget, then it wouldn't be something we'd have to worry about next year, if we had, unencumbered, unallocated bucks. We may not, but
Uncertified at least, I think we have.
uncertified.
We do. At least from what Race showed me.
Okay, well, that's even better.
So we'll look at what that would cost. We've added a specific date to talk about staffing levels and pay scale, and we know all of the things that we need to cover, I think. Are there other things that people want to talk about tonight? Did anyone have miscellaneous items?
I have one, the auditor doesn't know I'm going to ask her this, but it's something we have talked about before. We have had several discussions of changes to the municipal income tax. We've They've been reported on. I feel like that's been in the discussion phase for long enough. I'd like to move those ahead if everybody's okay with that. I mean, we're gonna have to read them 3 times, and they only, I mean, they really wouldn't have an impact till further out, but it would be nice by the end of the year to get those changes made.
No problem
Does that
with
sound
So
reasonable?
any reporters who are still here, let people know we're going to be talking about that?
No, we can do it.
watching on TV.
Okay.
We don't have to do it next time, we can do it the time after that. I just would like to put it on a trajectory to be passed by the end of the year, so then it's in place, that's all.
I think we've discussed it
Yeah, I
in
thought
committee
so.
twice.
It's been,
Yeah.
we brought it up, it's been a year since we first brought it up, and then we talked about it in the summer, then we talked about it again, and so if you're ready, Kathy, with drafts, we can get those to Debbie and get them up. Okay, thank you.
No, I think it is a very
Lots of crows. There's still more.
Okay, well, other than finishing the snacks that Leslie brought, I think we're done for tonight.
Okay, thanks.